Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about process of normalization. We're going to start with unnormalized form, which is outside of first normal form here, and then we're going to work all the way up to third normal form. Uh, Before you can work your way up to the next normal form, you have to satisfy the requirements for the current normal form. For example, you cannot go from first normal form to third normal form. You have to first get the first normal form, then you work to second normal form, and from there you can go to third normal form. Let's talk about the unnormalized form. Usually data cells contain non-atomic data. They include null values. And let's look at this example, a client rental table. This is a situation, for example, you are handed a bunch of forms, like a paper forms where they include data, but they're not in a structured table format, and they just dumped there, right? So if you look at the client rental for this client, you have, this is the name, and these are the properties he rented. This is when he started, when he finished his rents, and then the addresses of those properties, right? Then the rentals he paid, owner number, owner name. So there's absolutely no structure of this data, and the amount of data that is packed together is definitely going to cause some update anomalies. Uh, and at this point, it's unnormalized data, unnormalized table, because there are a lot of null cells. So you cannot put this in a database as is, because database will require this to be separated into different rows. For example, this is one row, this is going to be another row. So these values would be null, and you cannot allow null because it wouldn't be true, because these uh, property numbers, etc., all these values are associated with CR56 Allen Stewart here, right? So you have to fill out all these um, basically with the same data, and then this process is called flattening the table. So you basically flatten the table. So this is how you work to first normal form from the unnormalized form. Another thing you need to uh, be aware of is that you cannot, any data cell, any intersection of rows and columns cannot have non-atomic values. For example, if in this table doesn't have that, but if it was done so that you didn't have the, the client number, let's say the client number and the client name are put in one cell, then it would not be atomic value. So you would have to uh, create another column, call it client number, and assign the client number there, and separately from the name. I will have an example like that later. So basically, to convert unnormalized form to first normal form, turn into table structure with rows and columns, turn it into the table structure, break non-atomic cells into additional attributes, and remove nulls. Basically, flatten the table. The first normal form, we can say that the relation is in a first normal form, in which each intersection of row and column contains one and only one value. Identify So when you get the first normal form, you can identify the primary key for the relation, and based on the functional dependencies, you have to create the functional dependencies, and then you can tell the primary key. Identify functional dependencies, because later, to go from first normal form to second normal form, you need to determine partial dependencies, and to do that, you have to come up with all the functional dependencies of all attributes. And if partial dependencies exist on the primary key, you have to remove them by placing them into a new relation. So you have to decompose the table if there are partial dependencies existing. So this is the first normal form of the previous table. So you can compare from we got to here from the previous one. This is the unnormalized form, which actually let me clean this. So it was like from here, and this is the flattened version of that table. Okay, this is first normal form. After first normal form, we have second normal form. Tables are said to be in second normal form. First of all, it has to satisfy the requirements for the first normal form, and then the primary key doesn't have any partial functional dependencies. You don't have any partial functional dependencies exist in your relation. Now, if your key is not a composite key, meaning that it's not made of multiple attributes, if it's only a single attribute, then it's automatically in second normal form. But if your primary key is made up from several attributes, and some of the non-prime attributes depend on part of your key, and the other uh, non-prime attributes depend on other part of your key, then you have partial functional dependencies, and the table needs to be broken down further to get to the third normal form. So this graphic here, these tables show the functional dependencies in the client rental table, and as you can see, primary key is the client number, property number, rent start, and rent finish. So client number and property number is the primary key, and this is a composite key, and there are partial dependencies because part of the table depends on the property number, and then the other part depends on the client number. For example, if you look into the data, you got owner number, owner name, right? Property address. These depend on the property number, this part of the key. On the other hand, you have, let's do green. On the other hand, you have client number, right? That depends on the client number. Client name depends on the client number. So you already have attributes that actually depend parts of the key, meaning that this table needs to be broken down further. Otherwise, you cannot get rid of partial dependencies. So one step, one iteration towards breaking it down, so you can separate the client. Remember, you can. There are two things you have to follow when you're decomposing tables. First, you have a lossless join, right? And then you also have to preserve the attributes. You cannot lose attributes. So we have to put the client information into client table. Now, why we're doing it? Because remember, again, we're trying to create cohesive tables, which means that attributes that are closely logically related should go into same table, right? So we have client-related data, we put them into client table. So it wouldn't make sense to have different tables where client number is in property something table and the client name is with some owner something table. That would not make any sense. So client related attributes, it makes a lot of sense to put them in under a client table. This is first step, but it's not there yet. Okay. Now there's still partial dependencies here because the you can see that you still have in the property rental owner table. So you got keys, client, and property number. Client number and property number they make up the key. So the key is composite key again. And several attributes depend on the property number, right? So again, the owner name, owner number, these things depend on the property number. So they just depend on part of the key. They don't depend on the client number. Therefore, this still needs to be broken down further. And this is a more ideal table where you have client data in client table. Rental is a different separate table where attributes depend on both of the attributes, primary key attributes, primary attributes. So all these non-prime attributes depend on both of the prime attributes. So if you break, like if you take one of these out, property number or client number, the functional dependency would not hold. So you cannot break it down further. Your left-hand side is going to have client number, property number, and that's how it holds. So there's no partial dependency left here. And the property owner table holds all the attributes that depend on the property number, which is the key. Okay, so all these attributes depend on property number. These attributes function depend on both of these attributes, and client name depends on client number. So that way, we reach second normal form. And the third normal form, to get the third normal form, you have to remove all the, first of all, it has to satisfy, your relation has to satisfy first and second normal form conditions. And then you need to get rid of the transitive dependency. Because if you have transitive dependency, you cannot have third normal form. And to get rid of transitive dependency, first identify primary key in the second normal form. Identify all the functional dependencies in the relation. You would have to do the same to get to second normal form anyways. And look for transitive dependencies. They exist on primary key. If they exist on the primary key, then you remove them into a new relation with the copy of their dominant. Now, there was one transitive dependency in the previous table here where, let me remove these. Okay. The owner name depended on owner number, but then owner number depended on property number, and owner name also depended on the property number, if you look at the data. And this creates transitive dependency, right? Meanwhile, this creates transitive dependency, and to get rid of this, you have to create another table, remove the and send the attributes that create transitive dependency, place them into that new table, and make sure you still retain the relationship through the common attribute, which is owner number in this case, because you cannot take away owner number from the property, because then you don't know who owns which property, right? And the final table would look similar to this. In the next video, I'm going to show you some detailed example.